Deputy Jim O'Callaghan, 30
seconds. Minister, many farmers in Ireland live in a state of fear of the threat of crime and the reality of crime. We saw recently in North Dublin that a farmer approached people who was on his land and they subsequently attacked him viciously and he sustained serious injuries. One of the issues that's raised by the Irish Farmers Association is the fact that if a farmer does identify people who are trespassing on his land, he can't avail of the criminal law. Like, under the law, Minister, what can a farmer do if he finds somebody on his land and he wants them to get off the land?
Thank you very much, Deputy. Minister.
Well, the Deputy will be aware that the general legal position in relation to trespass is that it is a civil wrong and, for the most part, may be addressed by means of a civil remedy through the courts. I want to acknowledge the interests of the farm organisations, rural organisations in particular, the Irish Farmers Association on this issue, and I meet regularly with the organisation and in particular its committee in my own Lee Shoffley constituency. The Criminal Justice Public Order Act of 1994, as amended, contains provisions specifically relating to the unauthorised entry onto and occupation of land, including farmland, as mentioned by Deputy O'Callaghan. Part 2A of that Act comprises sections 19A to H, as inserted by the Housing Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 2002, providing for offences in relation to illegal trespass and occupation of land which result in a range of specified adverse consequences. Such land includes privately owned land, public land provided or maintained by a statutory body. The legislation empowers the Garda Síochána to direct trespassers to leave the land concerned and, if necessary, remove any object belonging to them from the occupied land. The person who is guilty of an offence under this part is liable on summary conviction to a fine of up to €4,000 or a term of imprisonment. The Prohibition of Forcible Entry and Occupation Act of 1971 also contains provisions relating to trespass. Under this Act, it is an offence to forcibly enter land, including buildings, or remain in forcible occupation, or to encourage or advocate the commission of such an offence. The word forcibly is defined as using or threatening to use force in relation to persons or property, and such action is not necessarily linked to any other crime. A person guilty of this may face a fine and a term of imprisonment. So I just want to say that there are significant legislative provisions and penalties in relation to trespass. So I don't have any immediate plans to change the law, but I would be anxious to listen further to what Deputy O'Callaghan proposes in this regard.
Deputy.
Well, Minister, you've recounted a series of statutory provisions that obviously exist on the statute book, but that doesn't take into account the reality of what's happening on farmland throughout the country. Farmers find that when they find people trespassing on their land, that they've no remedy for that by going to the criminal law. When they contact members of An Garda Síochána, they're told that the Gardaí can only intervene if there is a threat to commit a criminal offence or if there has been criminal damage caused. Like, we know that in my constituency or any Dublin TD's constituency, if we found somebody in our back garden, we could call the guards immediately. And I suspect that the Gardaí would regard that person as having sought to enter the house. They would be arrested for seeking to burgle the house. It seems to be a different law that applies for people who are on farmland down the country. And I know it's not a sufficient answer, Minister, to state that trespass is a civil offence. Everyone knows that trespass is a civil offence. But what we require is for these legislative measures that you say exist, for them to be put into operation by the Gardaí on the ground, and that's not happening. Farmers find that if somebody's on their land, they're left helpless with the criminal law.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Minister, 1 minute.
Well, I don't accept that we're exclusively dealing here with civil remedies. I make reference again, without mentioning the statutes that I referred to earlier, but also I'd add that trespass in relation to buildings is also dealt with by the 1994 Public Order Act, Section 11 of that Act. Section 13 of that Act provides for an offence for a person without reasonable excuse to trespass on a building or in the vicinity of a building, in such a manner as is or likely to cause fear in another person. So there is a suite of legislation available, but I would be keen to hear further and would be amenable to a review if I thought that there was the type of immediate remedy that the Deputy OCallaghan envisages. I also said that that particular 1994 Act empowers the Garda Síochána to request a person to desist from acting in such a manner as to amount to a breach of the peace.
You'll be able to come back in. Final comment.
The remedy that a farmer wants is that he is able to tell the person trespassing on their land to get off his land, and if they don't get off his land, that there will be a consequence for it. Or the fact that they've been on the land, that there has been some consequence for that as well. When we say there is a civil remedy available, what the farmer has to do is he has to institute proceedings against individuals who are unknown and who then have to be brought before the court. You have to get an injunction before a civil court restraining the persons coming back onto the land. That's all very complex and detailed, Minister. I think the farmers of Ireland require some greater protection than is being afforded to them at present. Their concern, and it's a legitimate concern, is that people are coming onto their property, that they're examining the property for the purpose of seeing whether there's any valuable equipment on the property, and they do so for the purpose of returning subsequently to try to gain that property. That's something that you as a rural TD will know is happening, Minister, and other rural TDs in this House tell me frequently it is happening as well. There may be these statutory provisions which are on the statute book, but unfortunately they're not being used by members of An Garda Síochána and they're not effective for the farmers of Ireland.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Final comment.
Well, I've made reference to at least 4 pieces of legislation, and again I refer to the 94 Act brought forward by the then Minister for Environment and Local Government. I would certainly be happy to speak to Minister Murphy in order to ensure that these issues are kept under review. But in relation to rural crime in general, I wish to assure the House that rural crime is a key focus for An Garda Síochána, that there is a relentless pursuit on the part of An Garda Síochána of those responsible for crime in rural areas. And I remain very much committed to a vigorous and a comprehensive response to burglary and theft. But I will have a word with my colleague, Minister Murphy, as Minister for Local Government, and see if there are issues that might form the basis of a review as envisaged by Deputy OCallaghan.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your cooperation.